Good morning and welcome to this technical briefing. Bienvenue à tous les participants ce matin pour cette séance d'information. This morning we provide updates to Canada's response to the situation in Afghanistan. La séance portera sur la réponse du gouvernement du Canada face à la situation en Afghanistan. On a trois intervenants avec nous ce matin. With us this morning from the Department of National Defence, we have General Wayne Eyre, Chief of Defence Staff. From Global Affairs Canada, Associate Deputy Minister Cindy Termorshuizen. And for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, we have Assistant Deputy Minister Danielle Mills. This briefing is for journalists only. It's for attribution and may be recorded for broadcast. Cette séance d'information est réservée pour les journalistes. La séance est pour attribution et vous pouvez enregistrer cette séance pour diffusion. We will start with remarks from each of the speakers and then begin the question and answer period. As usual, one question and a brief follow-up per person, please. Après les remarques, nous ouvrirons les lignes pour des questions des journalistes. Nous vous demandons de vous limiter à une question et une courte question de clarification. Thanks again for joining us this morning. I will now hand things over to our first guest speaker, our D&D participant, General Wayne Eyre. Good morning, General. Over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. I would like to begin today by acknowledging that I'm speaking from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I'll be providing you an update on Operation Aegis, the Canadian Armed Forces contribution to the government of Canada's effort to evacuate Afghan nationals and Canadian citizens from Kabul, Afghanistan. Comme l'a souligné hier le ministre Séjean, les États-Unis ont confirmé que leurs opérations à Kaboul prendront fin le 31 août. Le Canada et nos partenaires multinationaux du pont aérien doivent mettre fin à nos opérations et repatrier nos personnels, nos ressources et nos aéronefs avant que les Américains puissent terminer la retraite de leur mission, ce qui comprend la défense très nécessaire de l'aéroport. Over the last day, our evacuation operations have ceased, and the majority of personnel departed Hamid Karzai International Airport approximately 8 hours ago. A small contingent remains on the ground to support and coordinate our air bridge for the retrograde of Allied forces while conditions permit. Before the airport was closed due to the Taliban, Canada had flown 9 flights out of Kabul, bringing over 800 people back to Canada, and supported the evacuation of the Canadian mission. On August 19th, once the airport had been resecured by our allies, Canadian Armed Forces flights to and from the airport resumed. Since you were briefed yesterday by ministers, the Canadian Armed Forces brought in and secured transit for approximately another 1,000 Afghans destined for Canada. Half of those flew out on a Canadian C-17 last night, while the remainder departed on U.S. aircraft. Thanks to the heroic efforts of our armed forces, our allies, our global affairs and IRCC colleagues, and the bravery of Afghans, Canada successfully transported or facilitated the transport of approximately 3,700 evacuees. Now, this number will be confirmed in the coming days. Ces personnes évacuées comprennent des citoyens canadiens et des résidents permanents, des membres de leur famille, des citoyens des pays alliés, des personnes ayant un lien durable avec le Canada et des ressortissants afghans à risque affectés pour la réinstallation au Canada ou par nos alliés. In a conversation last night with the U.S. chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he told me that this was the largest military evacuation in history. The Canadian Armed Forces contributed to these efforts by facilitating the movement of equipment, humanitarian supplies, and most importantly, people. For our part, the depth of our relationships with the US, the UK, and other allies made this all possible. We stayed in Afghanistan for as long as we could. We were amongst the last to cease evacuation operations. We wish we could have stayed longer and rescued everyone who was so desperate to leave. That we could not is truly heartbreaking. But the circumstances on the ground rapidly deteriorated. Now, this is an extraordinary humanitarian crisis, but make no mistake, this is a crisis of the Taliban's making. I want to be clear. In the face of tremendous adversity, what our armed forces have accomplished through Operation Aegis is nothing short of extraordinary. Our strategic lift capabilities allowed us to rapidly deploy our forces to the other side of the world into a country where we have not had significant military presence in 7 years. We also deployed armed forces capabilities, many currently in Kuwait as part of Joint Task Force Impact to support this mission. Every person, aircraft, piece of equipment involved in the operation was pushed to the limit towards a single goal: evacuating as many people as humanly possible. Nos militaires ont travaillé sans relâche pendant des jours et des jours. Ils ont donné leur propre nourriture et leur propre eau aux Afghans affamés et assoiffés qui attendaient à l'aéroport. Et nos opérateurs des forces spéciales ont œuvré à l'extérieur du périmètre de l'aéroport pour aider à faire sortir le plus grand nombre possible des gens vulnérables. En fait, nos forces spéciales ont commencé à travailler à l'extérieur du périmètre très tôt dans l'opération et qu'elles ont été parmi les dernières de nos proches alliés à revenir à l'intérieur de la zone sécurisée. Yeah, at the outset, we knew this operation could not be micromanaged from Ottawa. So we pushed authorities and required resources down to enable maximum flexibility, and our troops made full use of them. The conditions our armed forces members were working under were unlike anything we've seen in decades, even during our previous mission in Afghanistan. The threats around the airport were significant and dynamic. Throughout the operation, we received word of multiple imminent attacks, which necessitated changes to our plans on the ground and demanded maximum adaptability and agility on the part of our people. Non-combatant operations are inherently complex, but all told, this operation has been one of the largest, most complex, and dangerous in modern history. And operations like this take a tremendous toll on our people. Nous avons tous suivi avec effroi les événements qui se sont déroulés en Afghanistan ces dernières semaines. Ce fut une période chargée d'émotions. De vieilles blessures sont réouvertes pour certains, tandis que d'autres en subissent de nouvelles. So, as the Acting Chief of Defense Staff, my greatest concern now is for the wellness of our troops involved. They have witnessed horrific things. They have faced incredible dangers. And the feeling of helplessness and guilt that arises from having to leave people behind can be overwhelming. The same can be said for those of us working in Canada. Like so many of our CAF members and our veterans, like so many of you in the media, and like so many others, I have received emails from people I worked with during my tours in Afghanistan who are desperate to get out or get their families out. Their pleas and the photos of the families in terrible situations that accompany many of them are heart-wrenching. They tear at our souls. Et nous ne pouvions rien faire d'autre que de diriger ces pauvres gens vers les sources d'information officielles, en espérant qu'ils trouvaient le chemin vers la sécurité pendant que nos troupes sur le terrain faisaient tout ce qu'elles pouvaient. No matter what jobs we do, no matter what training we go through, no matter what military experience we have, we are human, and these horrifying stories will stay with us, in many cases, in most cases, for life. So caring for our people will be a priority as this operation winds up. Understanding that burden, I ask our members to focus on the thousands of lives that they saved. As they come back, they will be debriefed. They'll be given the time they need to decompress. We'll support them, ensure their well-being, and make sure they know how proud we are of them. Their experiences have not been made any easier by the fact this operation was carried out under intense and often misinformed public scrutiny and criticism. Now, for obvious reasons, operational details of what we were doing had to be kept quiet. So into that silence, some people interjected their own narratives without any real knowledge of the facts, adding to the confusion. Mais la vérité est très différente. Même si l'aéroport de Kaboul nous a laissé des espoirs qui nous brisent les cœurs. Dans les jours à venir, vous entendrez également le récit de héroïsme des personnes qui ont participé à l'opération, car ces histoires doivent être entendues. You'll hear stories about how the dedication, determination, and compassion, how the heroism of our Canadian troops saved and changed thousands of lives. You'll hear about the CAF members who cared for a new mother and the baby she'd given birth to approximately 15 hours before boarding a flight, making sure she and the infant made it to safety. Vous entendrez parler de la petite fille afghane qui a suivi un policier militaire à l'embarquement d'un de nos vols. Elle a demandé à son père comment une femme peut-elle être policière. Il lui a expliqué qu'au Canada, les femmes peuvent être policières. Levant les yeux vers les soldats, la fillette a dit qu'elle aimerait être elle aussi policière quand elle serait grande. You'll hear about the little Afghan boy who so admired one of our soldiers that he wouldn't leave his side as the soldier carried out his work during an evacuation flight, and how that soldier cared for the boy, who was about the same age as his own son, waiting for him to return safely home to Canada. Now, the events of recent weeks have, not surprisingly, caused many of us to ask about our past involvement in Afghanistan. Was it worth it? My personal answer is time will tell. I know we made a difference in thousands of lives while we were there, and every one of those lives counts as a win. We'll see if that's enough. Finally, I want to thank our Canadian Armed Forces families, the families of our fallen, and the many veterans that have been following these events closely, many of whom have been advocating for a better life for Afghan nationals. Thank you for your strength, compassion, and resolve during these difficult times. Canadians can be immensely proud of the work our team has been doing under incredibly dangerous and chaotic conditions in recent weeks. I know I am, and I thank them for their courage, ingenuity, and peerless professionalism. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Monsieur. Thank you, General. Now we go to Cindy Termorshuizen of Global Affairs Canada.
Aujourd'hui est une journée très difficile. While we are pleased that we have been able to assist a significant number of Canadians, permanent residents, and their families to leave Afghanistan in recent days, we recognize that today's announcement will be distressing news for those who are still in Afghanistan and wish to leave. We know that it will also be distressing for their families and loved ones, and for all who have ties to Afghanistan. That includes many of us who work at Global Affairs Canada. Dès la première journée de cette opération, nous nous sommes engagés à évacuer le plus grand nombre possible de Canadiens, résidents permanents et Afghans vulnérables le plus longtemps possible. La fin de cet effort d'évacuation ne signifie pas la fin du soutien du Canada au peuple de l'Afghanistan. In the coming weeks and months, we will continue to work with our allies to explore options to provide whatever support we can to Canadian citizens, permanent residents, and vulnerable Afghans who remain in the country. Please rest assured that we will spare no effort to help. Although our ability to provide assistance in Afghanistan is extremely limited at this time, consular support continues to be available to Canadians in Afghanistan. We are actively coordinating with allies in the region, at the G7, and bilaterally to determine which options might be available to assist our citizens and Afghans who assisted the Government of Canada, as well as other vulnerable Afghans. Dès le début de cette crise, les intervenants du Centre de surveillance et d'intervention d'urgence ont été disponibles pour répondre aux appels et aux courriels des personnes en Afghanistan à la recherche d'aide et de conseils. Actuellement, des dizaines d'entre eux travaillent 24 heures sur 24 par rotation. We encourage Canadians still in the country to stay in contact with us through the Centre. Reach out to us. Responders are available 24/7 and can be reached at 1-613-996-8885. Our officials will keep in contact with those who call on us for help. We will do so for as long as needed. We will keep in touch using whatever is the most effective way to help them stay safe, be it by phone, email, or text message. Les Canadiens et les résidents permanents qui sont en mesure de quitter l'Afghanistan en toute sécurité et qui ont besoin de l'aide dans un pays tiers doivent communiquer avec le Bureau du Canada le plus proche. Sinon, en attendant que la situation en matière de sécurité se stabilise, le gouvernement du Canada recommande aux personnes qui se trouvent encore en Afghanistan de s'abriter dans un endroit sûr. For our fellow citizens in Afghanistan, if you need to move to a safer location, please do so with great caution. Use your judgment to decide the best time and the safest means to do so. Assess the risk carefully as you take the necessary steps to ensure your security and that of your family. Our hearts go out to those who find themselves unable to leave Afghanistan and afraid for their safety. Nos conseils et avertissements aux voyageurs sont continuellement mis à jour avec les dernières informations dont nous disposons. Nous partageons ces détails sur les canaux de médias sociaux de voyage.gc.ca d'Affaires mondiales Canada et sur les comptes de l'ambassade du Canada en Afghanistan. Aux Canadiens qui sont en mesure de le faire, nous recommandons vivement de s'inscrire au service d'inscription des Canadiens à l'étranger afin de recevoir des renseignements importants et à jour. Merci. Thank you.
Thank you. Et maintenant, je donne la parole à Danielle Mills de l'Immigration, Réfugiés et Citoyenneté Canada. ADM Mills.
Bonjour, good morning. Les nouvelles d'aujourd'hui sont très troublantes pour nous tous. C'est une journée difficile et particulièrement éprouvante pour le peuple afghan. Let me be clear, we are not giving up. We will continue to remain in contact with Afghans on the ground and will support them in any way we can. Pour autant que possible, cela signifie, espérons-le, de faire du Canada le nouveau chez eux. Depuis le début, le Canada s'est fermement engagé à aider et à évacuer le plus grand nombre possible de personnes jusqu'à ce que nous ne puissions plus le faire en sécurité. Il s'agit d'une véritable tragédie que les circonstances en Afghanistan aient changé beaucoup plus rapidement que prévu. Nous avions espéré évacuer beaucoup plus de personnes et sur une période plus longue. Toutefois, comme vous le savez, la situation aujourd'hui en est autrement. I want to assure you that IRCC has been and continues to work tirelessly to process all applications under our special immigration measures afin que nous puissions offrir l'asile à toutes les personnes dans le besoin. We have mobilized our entire global network, and this operation remains our number one priority. En date de ce matin, le Canada avait reçu plus de 2500 demandes dans le cadre des mesures spéciales d'immigration, ce qui représente plus de 8000 personnes, pour lesquelles plus de 2/3 ont déjà été approuvées. And we will continue to work around the clock to process the remaining application as quickly as possible. Même s'il s'agit d'une situation très difficile, les personnes en Afghanistan doivent maintenant évaluer leur situation relative à la sécurité et faire tout ce qui est en leur pouvoir pour se protéger et protéger leur famille. Nous assurerons un contact étroit et continu avec eux. Grâce à notre réseau d'ambassades partout à travers le monde, nous veillerons à ce qu'ils disposent des renseignements et des soutiens les plus récents et qu'ils ont besoin. Here in Canada, IRCC is responding every day to thousands of calls and emails received through our dedicated phone line and email. Notre ligne téléphonique est disponible en dari, en anglais et en français, et nous acceptons les frais pour les appels à frais virés. Now that our evacuation efforts from Afghanistan have ended, Canada will begin to focus on the next phase of our operation. Ainsi, au cours des prochaines semaines et des prochains mois, nous collaborerons avec nos partenaires internationaux, y compris les Nations unies, sur notre engagement humanitaire plus large. Comme vous le savez, le Canada s'est engagé à réinstaller un total de 20 000 Afghans et nous continuerons de travailler pour aider les Afghans les plus vulnérables à trouver l'asile au Canada. Pour les Afghans qui sont déjà arrivés au Canada en toute sécurité, le soutien offert par les Canadiens a été et est incroyable. Merci à tous ceux qui ont offert leur aide et qui participent à cette initiative. Pour terminer, je tiens à nouveau à exprimer mes plus sincères regrets à tous ceux qui demeurent en Afghanistan, ainsi qu'à notre communauté afghane ici au Canada. Nous sommes à vos côtés. We stand with you. Nous vous soutenons et nous continuerons de faire tout notre possible pour tirer hors de danger le plus d'Afghans vulnérables possible pour les accueillir ici au Canada. Finalement, j'aimerais remercier sincèrement tous ceux et celles qui ont travaillé directement ou indirectement à cette situation tragique à l'international. Merci. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Mills, and thank you to all of our speakers. And now we're ready to take questions. On est prêt maintenant pour la première question. Operator, we're ready for our first question, please.
Thank you. Merci. We will now take questions from the telephone lines. If you have a question and you are using a speakerphone, please lift your handset before making your selection. If you have a question, please press *1 on the device's keypad. You may cancel your question at any time by pressing *2. So please press *1 at this time if you have a question. There will be a brief pause while the participants register. We thank you for your patience. Nous allons maintenant passer à la période de questions. Si vous utilisez un téléphone main libre, s'il vous plaît, soulevez le combiné avant d'effectuer votre sélection. Si vous désirez poser une question, veuillez, s'il vous plaît, appuyer sur les touches étoile 1 de votre appareil. Vous pouvez à tout moment annuler votre question en appuyant sur le 2, étoile 2. Alors, s'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. Il y aura un court délai vous permettant de vous enregistrer dans la file d'attente pour la période de questions. Merci de patienter. The first question is from Ashley Burke from CBC News. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Good morning. I'm hoping to get a sense of numbers. You had a list of about 6,800 applicants and about 2/3 of their applications were processed. And I'm hoping to get a sense of how many people you believe that are still there on that list that you weren't able to get out of Afghanistan. There's sort of an estimated number based on your figures.
Ms. Burke, did you have that directed? I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Si je peux me permettre, je peux peut-être commencer à répondre et mes collègues pourront enchaîner s'ils veulent ajouter de l'information additionnelle. Merci beaucoup pour la question. Je devrais dire que, comme j'ai mentionné dans mon allocution, on a reçu plus de 2500 applications qui totalisent environ 8000 personnes et pour lesquelles on a déjà traité et approuvé plus de 2/3 de celles-ci. Donc, ce qui nous reste à traiter va être traité de façon prioritaire au cours des prochaines semaines. Et c'est ce qu'on s'est engagé à faire et on veut rassurer les clients, les demandeurs à l'international que c'est un travail qui va continuer et on va les tenir au courant et on va leur donner l'information nécessaire en temps et lieu.
That in English before I ask my follow-up question, please.
Go ahead for your follow-up.
Sorry,
I'm sorry, I'm asking if you could please repeat that in English before I ask my follow-up question.
Sure. So thank you very much for the question. So as I mentioned in my introduction, we have received over 2,500 applications, and which totalize around 8,000 people. Out of that, we have processed over 2/3 of them that have already been processed and approved, and the remaining one will be processed, in the upcoming days. And we are prioritizing those applications, and folks around the integrated global network is working really actively to process those remaining applications.
So there are about 8,000 applications, and there were about 2,700 people who got out. So we could do the math and say the rest are still in Afghanistan. Is that what you suggest? And then for my second question, I'm hoping to find out, there are still people in Afghanistan, some Canadian citizens as well. What exactly do they do? And what specifically are you going to do to help those who are in third countries? Will you be pulling them out of refugee camps? Will there be military on the ground? What exactly is the plan? But first, if you could just clarify the numbers. Are we saying there's about, how many people do we think are left in Afghanistan on your list?
Thank you for the question.
Perhaps I could start from. Go ahead, Daniel, and then I'll follow you on the global affairs piece.
Thank you, Cindy. So as I mentioned, we have received a total of 8,000 people due to the special measures of immigration measures. Et comme mon collègue a mentionné, plus de 2700 ont été évacués de l'Afghanistan, plus les derniers vols qui ont eu lieu hier. Donc, on est en train de faire le décompte. We are looking at presently at, really looking at the remaining population in Afghanistan. But it is important to note that all of those 8,000 applications that we received, not everybody is in Afghanistan. Some of them could be in the neighboring countries. So we have to kind of look at our list, and we will be in a better position to confirm exactly who's still in Afghanistan in the upcoming days.
And perhaps I'll follow on from a global affairs perspective with respect to Canadian citizens, permanent residents, and their families. So we have been able to get hundreds of these individuals out of the country thanks to both the Canadian Armed Forces, airlift capability, and also seats made available on Allied aircraft. And what we are doing right now is getting a better handle on those numbers. We know that people have gotten on flights from allies and are in third countries, and perhaps going to your question on that, we have mobilized our entire network of embassies and high commissions and consulates around the world to look out for people that are arriving in third countries in order to provide them consular assistance. We are also putting out messaging on our website. We're putting out messaging through press availabilities like this to ensure that people know who to contact, and our diplomatic missions around the world are poised to do that for anyone who has made it out of Afghanistan through other means. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from Yasmine Kayat from Radio-Canada. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour tout le monde. S'il vous plaît, j'aimerais que quelqu'un reprenne en français le nombre exact de personnes évacuées, le nombre et les détails de ces évacuations des dernières opérations, tel qu'a été mentionné par le général Eyre en début de son allocution en anglais. Merci.
General Eyre, you're on mute.
Yes, hello. Je peux dire aussi, je suis le modérateur, que tous les détails comme ça, vous pouvez aussi, pour ajouter des informations, appelez-nous à relation avec le média. L'invitation, le contact, l'information est là dans l'information. C'est juste pour ajouter ça, mais je donne la parole à les intervenants maintenant aussi. Merci.
General, I believe you're on mute.
Je peux confirmer en français que pendant la dernière journée, nous avons arrêté nos opérations d'évacuation. Il y a 8 heures, notre dernier vol a quitté le pays avec notre force opérationnelle. Il reste une petite équipe de liaison sur le terrain pour aider avec la coordination avec nos alliés. Et l'équipe là va rester sur le terrain pour les prochains jours ou deux.
Votre question de suivi, s'il vous plaît, Mme Kayat?
Oui, bien sûr. Alors, on a parlé justement de 2 tiers de demandes qui ont été approuvées sur les 2500 demandes reçues à date. On sait aussi qu'une partie de ces demandes approuvées ont été approuvées pour des Afghans qui se situent à l'extérieur du territoire afghan. Mais comment est-ce que ça va s'organiser pour ceux qui sont encore à l'intérieur? Je sais que c'est encore trop tôt, mais est-ce que vous avez des pistes de solutions ou de réflexion par rapport à l'évacuation possible de ces personnes qui ont finalement reçu leur sésame?
Merci pour la question. Nous continuons à venir en aide aux personnes qui sont en Afghanistan et qui désirent se rétablir comme réfugiés au Canada. Et ce même après la fin de l'évacuation qui a été mentionnée aujourd'hui. nous allons rester en contact avec ces personnes-là et via email, via SMS, texto. Et ils peuvent également en tout temps communiquer avec nous. Comme j'ai mentionné précédemment, nous avons la ligne téléphonique. On a le service, une boîte de courriel qui est dédiée à ces services-là, qui peuvent nous communiquer en tout temps. Donc, vraiment, on veut essayer d'une certaine façon de les rassurer. On ne les laisse pas tomber. On est encore là pour eux. Mais comme vous avez mentionné dans votre question, il est un peu trop tôt pour savoir les prochaines étapes. Et c'est quelque chose qu'on travaille en étroite collaboration avec ma collègue Cindy, les affaires mondiales, pour vraiment s'assurer c'est quoi les prochaines étapes. Et à ce point-ci, il est un peu tôt pour voir vraiment ce qui s'offre à nous.
And maybe I'll just add to that from a Global Affairs Canada perspective to say that I think, as you're all aware, both the political and the security situation in Afghanistan are very fluid. We do not know what the next government will look like, what it will be comprised of, and what its approach will be to the departure of foreign nationals or Afghan nationals. But we are working extremely closely with allies and other countries in the region to assess this and to explore options for continuing to support our Canadian citizens, permanent residents, our members of our special immigration program, and also other vulnerable Afghans. Thank you.
Follow-up?
Thank you. She had already asked her follow-up. Thank you. Merci. The next question is from Mike Blanchfield from the Canadian Press. Please go ahead. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Yes. Can you just clarify maybe can you give us a better sense of how many Canadians are actually still left behind in Afghanistan, and if any of the military personnel who are left behind, if they're still working on trying to find them and bring them out on other flights?
I'm happy to take the first part of that question. So as I mentioned in my remarks, we do know that we have been able to take out hundreds of Canadians, permanent residents, and their families. Some of those flights just went out last night, and very large numbers went out both on Canadian and U.S. aircraft, as the Chief of Defense Staff has mentioned. So we are currently in the process of going through all of those numbers and the manifests. We are also, as I mentioned, aware of Canadian citizens, permanent residents, and their families who have ended up in third countries, either through allied flights or by other means. So we are also urgently identifying those individuals in order to provide them support, but also to gain a clearer picture of what the remaining number of Canadians is in the country. So that is a priority effort going forward, and we will be happy to share more information as that becomes available.
And maybe this is a question.
I'll just add from a Canadian Armed Forces perspective, we have a very small team that is focused on helping the coordination with our U.S. partners of extracting their forces on the ground. The reality on the ground is the perimeter of the airport is closed. The Taliban have tightened the noose. Very, very difficult for anybody to get through at this point. And so our team will be focused on working with our American allies to enable their extraction.
Well, as a follow-up then, General, will that include using American air assets perhaps to help, because we don't seem to have that? I mean, maybe there are helicopters and working with them to get more people out?
So at this point, all of our allies have ceased personnel recovery operations, from my understanding. So the answer is no.
Thank you. Merci. Once again, please press *1 on your telephone keypad if you have a question. De nouveau, n'hésitez pas à faire étoile 1 sur votre appareil pour toute question. La prochaine question est de Boris Proulx, Le Devoir. À vous la parole.
Merci de prendre ma question. J'aimerais savoir si vous avez été surpris par la vitesse avec laquelle l'aéroport de Kaboul a dû être évacué et comment vous expliquez ça, étant donné l'intelligence qu'on avait sur le terrain et celle de nos alliés.
Perhaps I can start from a global affairs perspective. Go ahead, General Eyre.
I'll just say from our perspective, warfare is always chaotic and unpredictable, and hindsight is 2020. Based on the information we had at the time, yes, we were surprised by the speed of the Taliban takeover of Kabul, and I'm sure there will be much ink spilt about this. But we have to look at going forward now and what next steps we take. Thank you.
I think General Eyre has said it well. I'll leave it at that.
Si en question de suivi, vous dites que vous allez travailler avec nos alliés pour la suite des choses, j'aimerais savoir concrètement qu'est-ce que ça veut dire exactement pour aider à faire sortir le reste des réfugiés ou le reste des Afghans qui doivent venir au Canada. Est-ce que ça veut dire aller dans d'autres pays? Est-ce que ça veut dire faire des missions, participer à des missions sur le terrain pour aller les chercher? Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire?
Maybe I'll start and others might want to add. It's a very good question. As I mentioned earlier, the political and security situation on the ground is very fluid. One thing we don't know, for instance, is once the military retrograde is completed, even what kind of airport will be available for civilian flights. So understanding even what kind of transportation options are available is still quite difficult. So those are the things that we are urgently working with allies to understand those avenues for potential departure for those who still wish to leave, and then also gaining an understanding of what might be possible under a new government in Afghanistan. And the composition of that, of course, is also not clear. So all that to say, there is much that remains unknown, but we have daily, multiple times a day, conversations at all levels of the government with allies, with regional countries, to better understand what that future might look like, and therefore what options might be available for us to further assist Canadians, permanent residents, our SIMS applicants, and any vulnerable Afghans that remain on the ground and wish to leave. Thank you.
And I will add, over the coming days, we'll be working in the region to move forward the Afghans that we've brought out. Our base in Kuwait is quite full. As I mentioned in my opening comments, we were able to secure spaces on a number of American aircraft that have moved Canadian destined Afghans to a number of different locations in the region. So over the coming days, we'll have to gather those up, bring them to a central location for onward movement to Canada.
Hello, operator. I think we're ready for the next question.
Certainly. Thank you. Merci. And it is from Amanda Connolly from Global News. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Good morning. Thank you for holding this briefing with us. General Eyre, I could hear the emotion in your voice this morning when you were giving your opening statement. I think a lot of Canadians watching this right now are emotional as well and are angry. I want to know, are you angry with the Americans for this decision, and how have they justified this to you in the conversations that you've had? Because right now this comes across as the U.S. effectively being willing to accept that Canadians left on the ground, allies, and all the Afghans who put their lives at risk to help us are probably going to die.
No, Amanda, every country has to make their own decision as to what they're going to do. We made ours in 2014. I was in Afghanistan when our country decided to attend our mission. I was at the ceremony at the Canadian Embassy as the flag was lowered. We have to remember that the Taliban have the responsibility for this crisis. The Taliban are the ones who are inflicting this pain on Afghans. The Taliban are the ones who are restricting the ability of so many to get to the airport to be extracted. So put the blame on them, please.
Right now, to not extend the evacuation effort means that all of the countries that have said that they would be willing to continue doing this work have to pull back as well. Can you break it down for the people who are watching this in plain language? What are the logistical barriers here to countries like Canada stepping in to take control of the airport if the Americans do not want to do that? Is it a lack of intelligence, a lack of technology, a lack of people? Can you just help us understand that?
So there is no country in the world other than the U.S. that's got the capability of projecting force to the other side of the world and securing an airport like that. I'm very happy with the Canadian capabilities that we've been able to exercise here. A decade and a half ago, we would not have been able to do this. Getting the strategic airlift in the form of C-17s has been a game changer. Using C-17s in conjunction with our special forces, in conjunction with strategic communications, has allowed us to be part of this operation. Quite frankly, Canada does not have the capability to do this unilaterally. Neither does any other country besides the U.S.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from Ashley Burke, CBC News. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Good morning. General Eyre, you mentioned that there was a lot of intense misinformation because the military wasn't releasing details due to operational security. What specifically was the misinformation that you feel was out there?
So for example, many of you have seen a video circulating around that shows Afghans near our security personnel. And we don't know the context of that video. What I do know is our troops were working for days on end with no sleep. The perimeter, the gates were open and closed based on the security threats. Tens of thousands pressed up against the perimeter of that airfield. So that is one example. But I do know that the proof is in the pudding of the thousands that we were able to get out, and I am proud of the work of each and every one of our members who were part of this operation. Whether they were our troops on the ground, whether they were our air crew who were flying in very difficult conditions, whether they are our staff throughout the line of communications coming back to Canada, whether it was our staff back here working incredible hours under very, very intense circumstances to plan this operation, in and amongst all of the other operations that we're conducting, around the world and here at home as well, in the context of a pandemic. So, that's one example.
Clearly explain to us why Canada is ceasing operations today, days before the deadline. Were you given a specific date by the Americans that you had to be off the tarmac, or how did this work? How was this date decided?
So I'm not going to get into specific operational details, but yes, there was a date given when evacuation operations had to cease and had to transition to retrograde operations. And what I mean by that is the extraction of the security forces on the ground. Understanding there are thousands of U.S. troops on the ground that are securing that airport, that is a very, very delicate operation in a contested environment. So without the ability to have the force protection necessary to secure the airport, we would not be able to conduct the evacuation operations. So that was a very deliberate transition date that was That was part of the planning process to meet the August 31st deadline.
Thank you. Merci. We will now take the last question from Yasmine Kayat from Radio-Canada. Please go ahead. À vous la parole, Madame Kayat.
Merci beaucoup. Je voudrais juste rebondir sur la question de ma collègue parce que des informations circulent sur une possible ou la possibilité d'attaque terroriste de l'État islamique aux abords de l'aéroport. Est-ce que ce serait l'une des raisons pour lesquelles on a suspendu les opérations d'évacuation afin justement de préserver et les Afghans et les personnes aux abords, mais également les soldats canadiens et les soldats de la coalition?
So the answer is no. But that being said, we continued throughout this operation to be very, very concerned about these reports of threats that came in. As I mentioned during my opening comments, that our plans changed on a almost minute-to-minute basis as these threat reports came in with specific targets that really demanded the adaptability and flexibility on the ground. Our troops working outside of the perimeter assume force protection risk. In all likelihood, more force protection risk than I was comfortable with to get this mission done. But we took very seriously these threats as they came in. Most recently as including over the last few hours.
Une question de suivi, Madame Kayat?
Oui, je voudrais juste savoir, c'est quoi le message que le général Eyre voudrait donner à ses troupes et quel est le moral de ses troupes?
Well, it's no surprise this has hit us all very hard, especially those of us who spent part of our lives in that country. My message to the troops who are involved in this operation is focus on those that we got out. I had this conversation with one of my staff several days ago, and he told me, sir, if we save one life, it is worth it. So I asked my troops to focus on that, focus on the lives that we saved, live their lives as our fallen would wish them to live them. Focus on being better each and every day, and we'll get through this.
Thank you. Merci. There are no further questions registered. Il n'y a plus de questions à ce moment-ci. I'll now turn the call back to Mr. Bill Brown. De retour à vous, Mr. Brown.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of the speakers and to everyone for participating. Merci tout le monde pour être là aujourd'hui. Follow-up questions can be sent to the appropriate media relations teams. Pour d'autres questions, veuillez communiquer avec les équipes de relations avec les médias. Contact information is on the media advisory sent out last night. Have a good day et bonne journée.